Hi, this is Ken with IPD. Just want to do a little overview on the suspension on these cars. Sometimes we refer to these as P80 cars. I don't think that's really technically correct. But the front-wheel drive cars that were manufactured by Volvo as 850s, S70s, and V70s, 93 through 2000, pretty much all the same basic suspension package. A few basic items are the same all the way through, and they have the same failure points. The rear suspension on these cars is what we refer to as a delta link. In other words, there are two deltas, two triangles, which cross over each other like this and move up and down like this. The upside of that is that there are very few moving parts in the suspension. It's actually very easy to maintain. The downside is it doesn't have the best articulation of any suspension used. Basic parts: springs, delta links, shock absorbers. You don't get a lot of failures on these. There are only 4 bushings in the entire rear suspension. They don't fail very often. There are 2 bushings where the delta link suspension mounts to the chassis. There's one here, one on the opposite side that matches it. And there are 2 bushings where the 2 delta links bolt together. One here, and again one on the opposite side that matches it. We have these bushings. We don't sell them very often. The front suspension on these cars is not a heck of a lot more complicated than the rear. It's a very simple McPherson Strut design with an A-arm. The control arm is really the primary failure item on these. You have problems with the bushings wearing out, gets loose, allows the car to deflect under braking and heavy acceleration. And problems with the ball joint on the other end of the A-arm. The A-arm is all one assembly, bushings on this end, ball joint on that end. You can't replace the ball joint in it. It's too difficult to replace the bushings. Generally people replace it as an entire assembly. Later cars use this 4-bolt style of mount with 4 bolts that come through the frame to grab the back of this A-arm. They started using these somewhere in 1998. It's not a clean break, so if you have a car that after 1997 you want to check which style of A-arm your car has before you order. The only other frequent wear components in the front end of these cars are the hub itself, which contains the wheel bearing. Again, you can't replace the wheel bearing separately, you have to replace the entire hub assembly. And the end links, which fail continuously on these cars and cause a small rattling noise over small bumps. These cars have a typical McPherson Strut front suspension. Up and down motion is controlled by the strut and the spring. Rotation controlled by the upper strut mount and the spring seat. Let's do a little blow apart of a McPherson Strut assembly. You don't want to try this like I'm doing here on the tabletop. There's a lot of power saved up in one of these springs. You need a spring compressor if you're going to take it apart on your workbench at home. Top of the strut, the part that sticks through up above that you see under the hood, this nut, this cap, and then the upper strut mount will come off. This turns like this, and that's what allows the front wheels to turn and steer the vehicle. The spring is actually contained by this rubber piece right here, and these are a frequent failure item on these cars. What happens is this bushing between the sleeve and the outer surface tears apart, the sleeve comes loose, the shaft is no longer indexed in the front mount, and that causes all kinds of knocking sounds. It's a very high failure component. These are our IPD HD mounts, which use a higher content virgin rubber and have more rubber in here to prevent that. Then all there is the spring and the strut itself. That's suspension in a nutshell for these cars. If it's time to maintain these parts, or if you're considering upgrade, we do have upgrade components for most of these. We have sport coils, several different versions of shock absorbers, and of course our famous IPD anti-sway bars. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call.